Hi, my name is Jake Vossenkemper, Director of Agronomy and Research here at Liqui-Grow.
Hi, I'm Katie Hess, Director of Sales and Marketing here at Liqui-Grow. Dr. Jake, I know you got a kindergarten graduation that you just went to, and we have a preschool graduation that we just went to, and...
I was worried she wasn't going to graduate. No, I'm kidding.
You threw me off here.
Sorry.
My son said to me, Mom, is this it? Do I have to learn any more? And unfortunately, or fortunately, we continue to learn. And so this is a special lead academy that we're bringing to you to learn about all of this rainfall that we've experienced so far in the growing season, Dr. Jake, right?
That's right.
We've had a ton of phone calls. And if you look at some of these weather models or weather maps, from Tama all the way to Trayer, pretty much across all of our geography, we've experienced a lot of rainfall here this spring. We've also had these pop-up thunderstorms as well. So I was just talking to the farmer here a minute ago who's putting the side dress nitrogen on this field. And he said that at his house they had like an inch of rain on Memorial Day. We had 6/10, but the neighbor had 3.5 inches. So we're experiencing a lot of different rainfall. So what works for you today is maybe what's not going to work for your neighbor. And so Jake, we're going to dive into some of that, right?
That's right. Yeah, Katie. So there should be some weather maps that pop up here on the screen. As you can see, most of our geography, especially in the state of Iowa, especially in the state of Iowa here, north central Iowa in general, has had a lot of rain this spring. In general, most of our geography's had 15 plus inches of rain, okay? And you can look at those maps. And what that's going to mean is that's going to create a lot of potential for in-loss. There's also going to be a map that pulls up on the screen here with the individual weather stations that kind of created that map. And you'll notice that around the Waterloo area, up toward Clear Lake and Hampton, even toward the Des Moines area, Iowa City, there's a lot of near record spring rainfalls, meaning that those spring rainfall estimates are meteorological spring, so from March 1st through the end of May, okay? And you'll notice that many of those stations have recorded in the top 5 wettest springs on record, all right? But as you get down toward the Quad Cities, some have almost record rainfall amounts in the spring, and some are only, in the 20s to 30 top wettest spring. So to your point about the thunderstorms, yes, we've had a lot of widespread rains. We've also had a lot of localized heavy rains. So you need to be thinking about your individual geography and how much rain you've had as we go through this discussion, because that's really going to drive a lot of the in-loss potential that a lot of us have had this spring.
So what you're saying is worry about your own farms, not worry about your neighbor's farms. And look at your own crop.
Yeah, you need to think hard about how much rain have I had in my very localized geography.
Sure.
In general, we've all had a lot of rain, but some have had more than others.
Just very different since last year.
That's very different.
So let's talk about that, Jake. If you've had more than 12 inches of rain, let's say, how much nitrogen have you lost at this point? And do you have enough out there to keep you going?
Yeah, that's a good question, Katie. So there's going to be a figure come up on the screen here. Now this work on this figure was done by the University of Illinois in northern Iowa. All of it was done in northern Illinois, excuse me. Thank you, Katie.
That's where I'm from.
All of it was done in northern Illinois, kind of in the early to mid 2000s, okay?
Does that mean that it's relevant to today? I mean, we're in 2024 already.
It's very relevant today, and given that it was done in northern Illinois in soils that are very similar to Iowa, it's extremely relevant to what we're discussing today.
Sure.
Okay. And so what you have on that figure is you have total spring precipitation, which is March 1st to the end of May, which is exactly the weather data I provided you. And then you have in-loss. And what you're going to see that at about 10 inches of total precipitation, there's an inflection point, and in-loss really picks up after you've had about 10 inches of total rain in the spring.
This is kind of a silly question, Jake, but if this rainfall happened before you put your nitrogen on, if you're putting it on with the plant or if you're putting it on right after does that count?
It's clearly not as impactful as if you put it on all before the rain, right? But
right.
That's really getting into the weeds, and that's why you have to think about your local geography and your end management practices in general. Okay, of course, fall applied nitrogen with the warm winter we had and the wet spring we had isn't going to be in very good shape. Clearly, if you put UAN on very early, like in the middle of March, that's also not going to be in very good shape, right? But if you put it on with the planter or you're planning on side dressing, you're in really good shape relative to those other two categories.
Okay.
So N management is really how you put your N on, when you put your N on, is really going to pop out.
So why is this
year.
10 inches? Why is that important? 10 inches of rainfall.
Yeah, and I think it's important we talk about that. And so you might be asking the question, why when you get to about 10 inches do you really see N loss pick up? Well, fortunately, Katie, in a lot of cases, fortunately, our soils are beautiful soils. They're like a sponge.
This is an average, of course.
This is an average, of course. But they can hold about 8, 9, 10 inches of water, and that's great. And that's why you don't see irrigation pivots on every field here, because we can hold lots of water, right? The problem becomes when the soil gets full. When the soil gets full like a sponge, any additional rain you have, excess of what the soil can hold, starts draining freely, okay? And with that free draining water is the nitrate that's in that water, okay? In addition to that, when the soils get saturated, when they get full, when the sponge gets full, that means that you've replaced the oxygen in the soil with water, and there's no more oxygen. And then you start losing nitrogen via something called denitrification.
Right.
There's going to be another figure that's going to pop up here in a minute, and you will see that as we get later in the season, as the soils get warmer, denitrification becomes an even larger problem. Warm soils without oxygen equal lots of denitrification.
So first off, your soil profile gets full of water. You have leaching, so it goes down.
Yep.
Then once it's full, you have denitrification, which means it goes out this way.
Yes, as a gas.
Yes.
Correct. So once
Which is different than volatilization.
Which is different. It's also
It is
gas,
Elite
but it's a
Academy,
different gas.
so do you want to tell the folks about volatilization versus denitrification?
Yeah, so volatilization is the loss of urea as ammonium gas, okay, and that typically happens when you apply urea forms of nitrogen to the soil surface, okay. Denitrification is nitrous oxide and dinitrogen gas that is given off by bacteria when they use nitrate as an alternative electron acceptor instead of oxygen. So that's what denitrification is, and that's how they're different.
So volatilization, that's why we ask you oftentimes to work in your 32
or use a urease inhibitor or ban your nitrogen. All those things can reduce ammonia volatilization. We're talking about denitrification.
Which is sometimes more associated with water and too much water.
Correct,
Okay.
Absolutely, yep.
Okay, Jake, so I let you get a little technical there on denitrification, volatilization, and leaching for nitrogen. A lot of folks out there have experienced rainfall like this before. This is nothing new, really, to have a wet spring from time to time. It is a little aggravating, but when should we be concerned about the loss of nitrogen, and when should we be thinking about side dressing more? I mean, we don't always do that. We always sometimes have a really good corn crop anyway.
Right.
Is it worth it? It's a lot of work to side dress a farm.
Yeah, I think if there's ever a time that it's worth it, in general, but this is why you need to think about your localized rain amount, but if there's ever going to be a season in recent memory that's worth it, it's going to be 2024.
Okay, you heard it here first, folks.
And so I think we should talk about, your options are, well, go side dress, or how else do I tell if I have enough nitrogen in the soil, right?
Yeah, you could shake your magic 8-ball.
Right, and so
Do I have enough?
What Katie's, I think the magic 8-ball Katie's referring to is the PSNT test, which stands for the pre-side dress nitrogen test. And I just want to say that when used appropriately, that test can be fairly predictive of how much N is left in the soil. And there's an equation that goes along with it that says if you have X part per million in the top foot, then I should apply X more to get me to maximum yield potential.
And I'm not discrediting that,
No,
okay?
I know
But
you're not.
when we're in ag retail and it's 85 degrees and this corn is growing fast, I don't often have time to go get the sample, send it off to the lab, get it back before it's too late.
True to form. That to be clear and honest, that's the problem, right? So you got to go take these samples at a foot deep. You're supposed to keep them on ice when you ship them to the lab.
Oh.
You got to wait for the lab to get the results back to you, and then you have to make a decision. Okay, and by that time, is it too late? Well, I don't know, maybe, right? I mean, that's the problem. The other problem
Could start raining again.
could start raining again, that's right. The other practical problem with the PSNT test is you can't just take one sample on an 80 and expect it to be predictive of what you need to do, right? You
Shake
need
that
to
magic
take,
8-ball.
You need to take about one sample per 10, 20 acres, to be honest with you, to get a good estimate of what you should do. That's the problem. But it is a legitimate option. The other option is you can say, hey, I've had 12, 15 inches of rain. There's a good chance it's going to be profitable to apply more nitrogen. I'm telling you that. I can't say for every single field, but there's a good chance it's going to be profitable. So the other thing you can do is you can wait and do nothing, okay? I don't exactly advise that, but if you wait and do nothing, what you need to be looking for is around V8, V10, you need to start looking for yellow leaves developing in the bottom of the canopy. And if you've got yellow leaves developing at V8, V10, then there's no way you're going to have enough to get through the rest of the season.
Okay, Jake, I'm just going to pause you right there. You know, we often lose those lower leaves anyway. So what is the difference between losing those lower leaves and signs of nitrogen deficiency?
You're looking for an inverted V yellowing down the middle of the leaf, okay? So that's a nitrogen deficiency symptom. It's an inverted V down the middle of the leaf, and it will get progressively worse as you move down the plant, okay?
Because nitrogen moves.
Because nitrogen is mobile.
In the plant.
Yeah, plants can remobilize nitrogen from the lower plant up into the upper leaves.
Because
okay?
the lower leaves are just not as important as it grows.
Correct. They're not intercepting as much sunlight, so because the plant knows it's deficient, it's reallocating the N it has into the upper part of the canopy where it knows light interception there's more light interception and it's more efficient.
So if you wait to V8 or V10, is it too late to save this corn crop if you start to see nitrogen deficiency show up?
You can still recover a lot of lost yield potential. I've thought about this a lot, and I've done multiple studies to answer the question. It's rained a lot, I've already put on all my N, I've lost a bunch of my nitrogen, can I save this N-deficient corn? And the answer is absolutely yes, definitively. And you're going to see some data and some figures that pop up on the screen here. But what I did back in 2016 is I went into 3 different fields. And what you often see when you have large rain events, you often see that there's some parts of the fields that are extremely indeficient, the corn's yellow, you're thinking, I ain't spending another dollar on that corn, it's done. Okay, mm-hmm. You have those areas. You have areas that you're seeing these nitrogen deficiency symptoms in the lower canopy, but the corn is still relatively normal height. It looks like it's got good yield potential yet. You know, that's the corn you want to do something about.
Right.
Then you have other corn in that same field that is green from top to bottom. You think, oh, it's got plenty of nitrogen, right? So how do you handle an in-season application? Is it worth saving that porous looking corn? Those are the questions.
You're gonna have to save me in a second because the only thing I'm allergic to are bees.
So what we did, Katie, is we went into those 3 different areas in 3 different fields, and we established nitrogen rate response curves. So we applied nitrogen at different amounts in these different levels of indeficiency.
And that's what this data that you're showing right now.
Correct, yes. And what we found is that in all 3 of those areas, the corn was responsive to additional nitrogen, okay? Now, like I speculated, the corn in the middle, the corn that was relatively normal height, still looked like it had good yield potential, but was developing indeficiency symptoms in the bottom of the canopy, it was the most responsive. But even the corn that was really yellow, stunted, you know, you would think there's no way that corn's going to yield anything. Even that corn responded very well to these in-season, these rescue nitrogen applications.
So you're talking about it responded very well here. Is it enough to make up for the cost of the application and the nitrogen?
Most definitely. You'll have to look at the figure here, but we were seeing returns, if I recall, in the $50 to $70 per acre range.
So don't give up on your crop yet.
No, do not give up on your crop. If you choose to do nothing and you find out later, I should have done something, do not give up on it. Even the corn that looked fine and had no indeficiency symptoms responded to additional nitrogen because that corn made it a long way on the end that was in the soil. But even those areas had lost enough N that crop was still responsive to additional N. So when you're thinking about this rescue application, what that data shows us is there really isn't a reason to get worried about trying to variable rate that in. And what that data suggests is that 50, 60 pounds per acre across the entire field was profitable, in all 3 of those fields.
If 50 or 60 is profitable, is more profitable?
Well, you'll see in that figure that as we applied more, profitability went down.
Okay.
So there's a response curve there. So I think we went from 0 pounds of N, maybe up to 90 or 120, you have to look at the figure. But it was around that 60 pounds N that was the most profitable rescue N rate.
Okay. I want to stop you right there for a second, Jake, and ask you about tissue sampling. It has its place on the farm. It shows us some good data from time to time. Is it a good tool to use when we're trying to talk about nitrogen loss at this early in the game?
No, it's not a good tool to use at this point in time to predict how much N is left in the soil. It will tell you how much nitrogen is in that plant right now, but it's not going to tell you how much nitrogen is left in the soil, and that's what you need to know, okay? So, you know, this V5 corn plant probably has less than 20 pounds of N per acre in it, okay? And we could have had a whole bunch of N loss, but there's still 20 pounds of nitrogen left, right? So it's made it to this point, no problem. And taking a tissue sample right now is going to tell you it's made it to this point with no problem. But we still have 70, 80, 90, 150 pounds of N left to take up. And at some point, the crop is going to tell you it's running out and you're going to see yellow leaves. So taking tissue samples today to tell you what the N status of the crop is isn't going to do you any good, because you need to know how much is left in the soil. Do you have enough to finish the crop? That's what you need to know. And tissue sampling is not going to tell you that today.
So we just posted a blog on the website about nitrogen and side dressing, and we talked about V5 to V9 application. We're at V5 right now. What about for folks that, you know, it's pretty wet? What if they can't get back in until closer to that V8, V9 time frame?
Well, if you don't have enough nitrogen, V5 to V9 is definitely that window where it tends to be most profitable. But if you don't have enough nitrogen in the soil, getting it on is more important than having to have it on by V9.
Okay, and then if we have to wait till later, Y dropping, is that a good option, or just does application matter?
The most important thing is that if your crop is really indeficient, is that you get nitrogen on it in some way, shape, or form. You know, there could be a bunch of planes running around dropping urea. Probably not the best approach, because you're just not, you know, it's just not a very uniform application. But even then, if that's all you got, that's better than doing nothing.
Okay. Dr. Jake, we talked about nitrogen. We often talk a lot about sulfur. Is sulfur something that we're seeing deficient right now? There's a lot of little yellowing spots in some of these fields, especially on the end rows.
Yeah, we're seeing lots of sulfur deficiencies like we have been.
Can we apply sulfur with our nitrogen?
Yeah, you can definitely still apply sulfur with your nitrogen. It will definitely do some good for sure. And I might add that if you're gonna side dress, nitrate can leach too, or sulfate can leach too. So there's a good chance that adding a little more sulfur is probably going to be profitable with that nitrogen application.
So if you already have 20 units on, should you apply a little more, 5, 10?
I would think 5 or so would be enough at this point, if you've already put 20 on.
Okay, Dr. Jake, we've talked about rate, we've talked about timing, we've talked about why we're out here today. You know, this excessive rainfall or near record rainfall in some places. Any last things you'd like to talk about?
I would just say that there can be lots of opinions and discussions about what's the best application method, what's the best way to get your nitrogen on, and if you've had a lot of rain and you've lost a lot of N, the most important thing you can do is get it on. Whether that's Y dropping it, whether that's coulter injection. I'm not a huge fan of in-season urea applications when the corn's real tall, because what happens is it funnels the corn to the middle of that machine. I'm not a huge fan of airplanes dumping urea on the field, because you just have, you know, not very good uniform application. But even then, if that's the only option you have and you're short on N, do that, because it's going to be profitable. That's what my experience tells me.
Or call your folks at Liqui-Grow and we'll help you get that applied today.
That would be the best bet, of course.
Well, thank you for joining us on today's special report for Elite Academy. Thanks for taking your time out of your busy day, Dr. Jake. Actually, you're really not that busy because your plot is rained out right at the moment.
That's right,
and you can't get back to it. So.
Well, we have in-season applications we could be starting, Katie, but this is such an important topic. You're welcome. I'm happy to take my time to do this.
Yeah, thanks for coming today. Thanks for joining us on this special report on nitrogen loss because of the excessive rainfall. We are going to have our planned Elite Academy session here mid-growing season, I would say. And we usually talk about fungicide, but I know we're going to probably hit on this as well, right?
Yeah, we'll definitely provide an update on what we're seeing, you know, how the N loss is actually developing at that point in time, for sure.
And yes, join us because we have a really special surprise for everybody too. So, Hope you have a great day, and if you have any questions, reach out to your Liqui-Grow applicators. We would love to help you with this sidedress nitrogen piece.
Thanks, and we'll see you soon.
Lead Academy.
Liqui-Grow
Excellence
and agronomy development.